Welcome back to the show. Let's continue our discussion with today's guest, Dr. Ron Lieberman, President and CEO, Tristate Physical Medicine Associates. Dr. Lieberman, we were talking about right before the break, principles. Let's get into that a little bit. I know it's very intense, and right to you, my friend.
I'll make it easy for you so it's not so intense. Okay. So as far as principles, one of the most important things that we need to do is we need to change our mindset. Because our mindset, as I had referred to before, chronic back pain, failed everything, go get a fusion, right? And then, well, we could do an artificial disc replacement. We need to change our paradigm. And that's pretty much how medicine has been for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Hippocrates recommended bloodletting. And that was standard of care.
Really?
Mm-hmm. That was standard of care. And many, many known names experienced that. George Washington called his family doctor. Hey, I got a sore throat and I'm sneezing. What do I do? And his doctor said, come on in, we'll take some blood. And they weren't doing blood tests. They would take a lancet and it would slice people, either in the back of their knee or in their elbow in the crease, and they would let the blood out. Back then, the standard of care was that there's bad humors, not a bad joke. It's not about comedy, but just bad humors. You know, almost like, I'm not saying evil spirits, but there were just bad things in the blood. So they would just let your blood out, and so that's how he passed away. You know. Fast forward, my neighbor when I grew up, before he went off to college, was Muhlenberg. I don't know why I remember that. He gave me some old medical books, and these old medical books went back to the 1930s. And it was sort of like, yeah, it's like a souvenir. It's kind of cool. So I didn't read them all, trust me. But I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, I'm going through like every treatment. And I'm not saying it was bad. Was get plenty of fresh air. Open your windows, get plenty of fresh air. And it's still good today, right? It's still good, but that's how so many maladies were treated. Now, I don't know if you ever heard of the term, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning.
I sure have.
There you go.
Yeah.
That for a long time, that was standard of care for, not for everything, right? But that was the standard for, conservative care, right? For many, many years, it was recommended chronic low back pain, get a fusion. That was standard of care. So we need to step outside of ourselves and look at a new paradigm of something different. And so what's the actual underlying cause of this chronic low back pain? So discogenic pain or disc-mediated pain is the most common cause of low back pain. And when we're looking at the structural source was never mentioned to me in medical school. And it's certainly not in the old orthopedic surgery textbooks. It's not in the ones I looked at, and certainly not the ones of, with the older orthopedic surgeons that I've worked with. So it's nobody's fault. So this isn't about, putting down other people.
Can I ask you this, Doctor? Is there a reason why it wasn't, or is that something you're going to get into, or just?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I don't know. I just don't. I don't know why. But I can tell you that the most common structural source that's overlooked is called the annulus. When we talked on your radio show, I was saying to you, hey, here cut wood, here cut a tree, and you see these rings, these annular rings. And what happens is that when the disc gets injured, either by just a degenerative disc, which is what an MRI will show, it'll show a degenerative disc, it's not going to show tears, those annular rings get disrupted. And that annular disruption or the annular tears not only have pain receptors, called nociceptors, but they allow for extravasation of the center part of the disc, it's called the nucleus pulposus, which when it's housed in the middle of those rings, it doesn't cause any back pain. But when it leaks through those broken rings, it causes an immune response. And that immune response leads to inflammation and inflammation of those pain receptors within the disc. And so when the inside of that disc pours through those annular tears, it's going to leak out onto nerves, spinal nerves that are right by them. I've done many discograms where we inject dye into the center of the disc, and I've seen the contrast material pour out of the disc and literally leak along that spinal nerve. Where I previously did an epidural, where I relieved the inflammation of someone's sciatic and back pain, right. It was the exact nerve that's flowing out from the disc. Why that hasn't, why it didn't, so it's just the evolution of medicine is what it is. So it's the inflammation that's causing the problem. And some of the old school orthopedic surgeons aren't familiar with that, and they say, well, it's a pinched nerve. We got to take that disc off, unpinch it. Well, if that logic were true, then why is it that when we do an epidural steroid, which combats inflammation, we place epidural steroid along that nerve, the pain goes away, but does the pinched nerve go away? Does that herniated disc go away? No, it's still there. So it's the inflammation. The inflammation that's the enemy. So the other thing that brings along stress on those annular tears is the lumbar fusion. Well, how is that even possible? Well, there's an old physics called a lever arm. Now, I don't know if you ever lifted weights.
I have.
You have?
Yeah, and I need to get back in doing it again, but I gotta get the physicians.
Can we work out together?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, was the lifting and the inflammation and whatnot. Is it something is it warming up? I mean, you touched on this, and I'm just going to jump in there because I have felt that before. If you don't warm up properly or stretch properly, is this all part of the prevention of what we're talking about today? Part of it.
Yes, no, maybe not. Because when you're lifting weights, if you lift too much, you're going to increase your intradiscal pressure.
Okay.
And when you increase your intradiscal pressure, you're going to spread that pressure out along those annular fibers that are torn. So, getting back to the lifting weights.
Right.
And we're discussing the lever arm principle. If I was lifting weights and I was going to lift a weight from below this table to the level of my shoulders, right? There's a lever arm. The lever arm is coming from my elbow, right? So, and I'm also bending my wrist to bring it up to shoulder level, right? Now, if I fuse my elbow, I'm going to fuse my elbow. I pretend that's a disc, right? I fuse that elbow. What happens? So I'm still going to raise that weight to the level of my shoulder. Let me do it again. I didn't bend my wrist. I'm trying to keep my elbow straight. It's not natural. Right. So you're going like this, right? So where's the stress going to go? It's going to go on your shoulder, and it's going to go on your wrist. So it's going to go on the disc above and the disc below. If I keep doing that time and time again, repetitively, my wrist is going to break down, my shoulder is going to break down. And that's what happens with the discs. That's what we talk about adjacent segment disease or adjacent segment degeneration. So rather than my wrist getting degenerated from a fused elbow, the discs get degenerated. And then those discs develop further annular tears above and below.
Right.
You see? So, which is why artificial disc replacements, a lot of the artificial disc replacements patients are receiving the alternative treatment that actually treats. We didn't get into that yet. I'm leaving that for the end. So what happens is for the artificial disc replacement patients, there's two separate studies that did tests where an annulogram was performed. Now, this next slide that we're going to show is an MRI, and we're going to look at different levels, and you can see that there's a dark disc there, and there's a normal disc below it. The normal disc below it is the L5S1 disc. The one above it's the L45 disc. The annulogram is when we inject dye, contrast material into the rim of the disc, into the annulus, and that's to show where the tears are. And if you look at the annulogram that we're showing here, it shows that 5-1 disc that was normal in the MRI shows an annular tear, and you can see extravasation of contrast out the back side of that 5-1 disc. So annulograms were done in two separate studies, and the average number of torn discs were 3.7. I like simple math. We'll do 4, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
is
fine.
that okay? So when you do an artificial disc replacement, the odds are way in favor that the artificial disc replacement is next to an annular tear. It's already next to a defective disc, so that's going to accelerate that, and then they go on maybe to a second artificial disc. Only two levels have been approved for that, but that's going to just perpetuate the problem by doing the disc replacement next to likely a disc that already has an annular tear or defect.
Right.
Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense now, being able to talk to you and understand it and what goes into our back and whatnot. And I love the fact the way you described and showed us the lifting. I mean, where it's going to go, where it's going to strain. Doctor, we only have a few minutes left. I want you to be able to put it out there, what the treatment that you see fit for each one of us.
So the plan, it really comes down to what is the plan? Right. Well, the plan is, it sounds kind of simplistic, and it is. So what we'll do is we'll inject fibrin, right? Purified fibrin, and seal those tears. We seal the cracks, right? That stops the process. This fibrin has been used for open heart surgery to minimize bleeding. It's been used for dural tears in surgery. If there's a tear, the covering of a disc, tonsillectomies in adults where there's lots of bleeding. So it's a matter of consultation. Have you had 6 months of everything under the sun? And then we do an annulogram, if so, right? And we do a thorough history and physical. And then we do the annulogram, and we inject the fibrin into the disc tears. So, and then the recovery is a half hour, and they go home, and they gradually return to activity.
And before you know it, they're raking leaves.
And they're raking leaves,
right.
with a leaf blower.
Right, and that's the way to do it.
Leaf blower only.
Listen, again, the mindset is to be proactive, I believe, and part of what I'm taking to take away from what's going on here. And the fact that you've explained it so well, I hope our listening audience takes this to heed and be able to contact you as well. We'll be putting up the proper information. Dr. Lieberman, I want to thank you for taking the time to be our guest today, following through this, and as a former patient of back surgery and that sort of thing, I really feel that this is something that needs to be continued between us two, because there's so much, when you talked about inflammation, you talked about all the other, family history. I think that has to be put into account of everything. So again, I want to thank you for coming out here. And listen, love to have you back again. Folks, make sure you stick around. We'll be right back.